In 1974, the Sang family, Richard, Belinda, their two young children, David and Melissa, and their dog went camping near Carberry Creek. They mysteriously disappeared without a trace. 7 months later, the remains of the entire family were discovered by locals in a remote cave, revealing a chilling and horrifying scene. They were just gone. No screams, no struggle, no witnesses. An entire family, mother, father, 2 kids, and their dog vanished from a quiet Oregon campsite, leaving behind nothing but eerie silence. It was Labor Day 1974, a holiday weekend meant for rest, laughter, and grilled burgers beneath the trees. A picture-perfect escape. But by Monday morning, the Cowden family's campsite stood in stark contradiction to its peaceful surroundings. It was as though the family had simply stood up mid-breakfast and evaporated. The milk was still on the table, half poured, as though someone had forgotten the simplest of tasks. The diaper bag, usually filled with essentials, lay untouched on the ground. Their car, parked neatly by the campsite, contained wallets, purses, and keys, untouched, nothing out of place. Everything screamed normal, yet something felt terribly wrong. The Tons were gone. Every last one of them. A massive search was launched immediately. Bloodhounds, helicopters, and divers scoured the area. Still, nothing, no tracks. No signs of a struggle, no screams, only questions. Weeks turned into months, and still, no answers. Were they kidnapped? Did they run off? Perhaps attacked by a bear? The rumors swirled, but nothing concrete emerged. Then, 7 months later, an unexpected discovery changed everything. A teenage boy, out searching for gold in the same woods, stumbled upon something hidden in the rocks, a buried secret that would turn the case on its head. What had seemed like a simple disappearance was anything but. The Tons hadn't run, they hadn't vanished. They had been silenced. The truth, buried for months, was more than just a tragic accident. It was a calculated, deliberate act of cruelty. Inside a cave, investigators would find a discovery so horrifying it would shake even the most seasoned detectives to their core. Richard Sang, the father, was the kind of man who never drew attention to himself. Quiet, steady, and simple, he worked as a logging truck driver, waking before dawn and returning long after the sun had set. His life was routine, hard work, but he never complained. He found meaning in providing for his family, and his neighbors described him as dependable, honest, someone who would never leave things unfinished. And yet, even his quiet, predictable life would soon unravel in ways no one could have anticipated. How had they vanished? And why had no one seen or heard a thing? The answer was hidden in the shadows of those trees, waiting for someone brave enough to find it. Belinda Cowden was just 22, a woman who seemed to hold a world of serenity in her hands, her every action emanating a calm confidence. She had found her purpose, a purpose that consumed her completely, being a mother. Each day was a new opportunity to pour love into her children, to make their lives better, a life she felt she hadn't quite had the chance to enjoy. She wasn't just the warm heart of their modest home in White City, Oregon. She was the glue that kept it all together. Soft-spoken, gentle, but determined, Belinda made homemade baby food with care, kept her grocery lists neatly organized with pride, and made sure she never fell behind on the family's budget. There was an almost obsessive attention to detail in everything she did, and in that sense, she was the perfect mother. She was the center of their small, cozy world, built not on luxury, but on love, something far more precious than any material possession. Her family, Richard, her husband, David, their lively 5-year-old son, and baby Melissa, a mere 5 months old, completed the picture of a quiet, contented life. David was a curious boy, always racing ahead of his parents during walks, his mind constantly in motion, asking questions about everything. Melissa, still an infant, had a calmness about her that could only come from a mother's warmth, her small eyes wide in awe as she gazed at the trees or listened to her mother's voice. Together, the family shared a humble, rented house in White City, a place that wasn't big, wasn't new, but was enough. It was enough because they had each other, bound by a deep, unspoken bond of love. Weekends were sacred. The forest surrounding their home was an escape they cherished, a tranquil sanctuary far from the bustle of everyday life. Whenever Richard had time off, they packed up their 1956 Ford pickup and drove out to places where the air smelled of pine and the sound of creeks echoed in the distance. Carberry Creek, nestled in the Siskiyou Mountains, was their favorite. It wasn't far, but it was far enough to feel like a true escape. Their trips there had become a tradition, a retreat from the chaos of the world, a small slice of peace that the family could call their own. They didn't need much to enjoy it: a tent, some folding chairs, and each other. Richard brought his fishing pole, while Belinda packed sandwiches and snacks for the day. David would skip rocks across the creek, his laughter filling the air, while baby Melissa napped in Belinda's arms beneath the shade of the towering trees. It was simple. It was perfect. But the weekend planned for Labor Day 1974 would not be like the others. That trip was meant to be a continuation of their quiet tradition, a break from the everyday to enjoy the serenity of the forest. Richard packed his fishing gear. Belinda brought extra diapers and bottles for Melissa. David clutched his favorite toy, and together, they waved goodbye to a few neighbors, promising to return by Sunday evening. Their routine was as familiar as any other trip: no sign of distress, no hint of anything that would make this trip different. It was just another weekend in the woods, a chance to relax. But this time, they never returned. Days passed. They didn't show up for work. They didn't answer the phone. Their truck sat undisturbed, just as they had parked it. The campsite was found in order, like they had simply stepped away for a moment. But they hadn't. They were gone. Every trace of them vanished into thin air. No sign of a struggle, no footprints, no broken branches. No clue as to where they had gone or why. The people in town couldn't make sense of it. The Towns weren't the type of family to run, to leave their lives behind without a trace. They had no enemies, no conflicts, no reasons to vanish. They were the kind of family who waved at neighbors, paid their rent on time, and lived a quiet, unassuming life. Nothing about them screamed danger. Yet, here they were, gone without a single trace. The mystery grew deeper, and the unanswered questions began to gnaw at everyone. It was supposed to be just a relaxing weekend in the woods, a brief escape from the mundane, a family tradition. But it became the trip of a lifetime, not for the memories they created, but for the haunting disappearance that no one could explain. What happened to the Tans? Where had they gone? And why had everything been left behind, untouched, as if they had just disappeared into the very air? The question lingered, heavy and ominous. It was a mystery that would not let go. Have you subscribed to my channel yet? Please hit that subscribe button for me. In return, I'll keep bringing you even better videos about the world's most terrifying cases. Don't forget to leave a comment down below if you have any ideas or suggestions. September 1st began as any other morning, calm and serene, with the sun rising high in the sky, casting its golden light over the woods near Copper, Oregon. The Seng family, Richard, his wife Belinda, their two children, 5-year-old David, and baby Melissa, along with their scruffy terrier, had set off for their favorite camping spot in the Siskiyou Mountains. The air was fresh, earthy, and filled with the gentle sounds of nature, the wind rustling through the trees, the distant babbling of a creek. It was the kind of place where time seemed to stand still, where everything felt right, and nothing could go wrong. A perfect place to escape the noise of the world. Richard, in his usual fashion, decided to make a quick trip to the store early that morning, just before 9 a.m., to grab a few more supplies. It wasn't unusual. This was part of their routine. Meanwhile, Belinda stayed behind with the children, setting up the tent, arranging their sleeping bags, and preparing lunch. There was nothing out of place, no signs of anything amiss. Richard was in good spirits, anticipating a peaceful weekend in the forest with his family. That was the last time anyone would see him. When Richard returned less than an hour later, the campsite appeared exactly as he had left it. Belinda was sitting near the campfire, the children were playing nearby, and the day seemed to carry on like any other. Everything appeared normal. But this calmness, this serenity, wouldn't last. Later that evening, Belinda's mother, who lived less than a mile from the campground, arrived, expecting to see her daughter and grandchildren. She was looking forward to their usual stop for dinner on their way home. But when she approached the campsite, something felt off. A creeping unease settled in. The site was eerily quiet, far too quiet. She called out, but there was no response. As she drew closer, her heart began to race. The truck was still there, but something was wrong. Belinda's purse was lying open on the driver's seat, untouched. A diaper bag, normally filled with essentials for a toddler, was abandoned in the middle of the campsite. And the picnic meal, prepared and waiting to be eaten, was left out, cold and uneaten. The very scene that should have been filled with life, laughter, and warmth was now a chilling image of abandonment. What had happened here? Where was the family? And why was everything left behind? The answers were still hidden, and the mystery was growing deeper. The milk carton was still sitting on the picnic table, the lid cracked open as though someone had forgotten to finish pouring it. The sight was eerily ordinary. A small detail that somehow screamed something was very wrong. Belinda's mother, already feeling the creeping unease in her chest, started to panic when she noticed several of Richard's belongings scattered across the ground. His expensive wristwatch, now lying forgotten in the dirt, gleamed strangely in the sunlight. Nearby was his wallet, still open, with $21 inside, equivalent to $134 in today's money, a small fortune left behind carelessly. The emptiness of the scene felt suffocating, like something had been taken, but no one could explain exactly what. Then, there was the open pack of cigarettes. It was a brand Belinda was known to smoke. Her mother picked it up, staring at it for a moment too long, wondering why it was out in the open, like an unspoken clue left behind. Why had it been dropped here, in the middle of an otherwise quiet campsite? It made no sense, and that's what made the whole situation so terrifying. Richard's truck remained parked on the road, exactly where it had been left, but there was something unsettling about it too. Inside the truck were their clothes, everything, except their bathing suits. How could they leave so suddenly, and why would they leave behind their clothes, with just the suits missing? Had they been in a hurry? But where had they gone, and why? And the dog. Still tied to the nearby tree, it sat motionless, confused, waiting for a master who would never return. It seemed to understand something had changed, but like everyone else, it was trapped in a moment that didn't make sense. Belinda's mother, desperate to understand, searched the area. She called out repeatedly, but there was no answer. Her calls echoed in the silence, swallowed by the forest. She ran to the nearby creek, thinking they might have gone for a walk or just out of sight. But there was nothing, no sign of life, no footprints in the dirt, no broken branches, no evidence of any struggle. It was as if the family had vanished into thin air. She searched desperately, her heart pounding, trying to make sense of it all. Maybe they went for a hike, maybe they went to get something. There had to be a reason. The more she looked, the more impossible it became to understand. There were no signs of violence, no blood, no broken branches, not even a trail leading away from the campsite. No animal tracks, no sign of struggle. It was as if the forest had swallowed them whole. The campsite was undisturbed, untouched, like the family had simply ceased to exist. The only sign of life was the dog, sitting by the tree, a quiet sentinel in a world turned upside down. Panicked and confused, Belinda's mother finally left the campground to notify the police. The sheriff, troopers, and the District 3 office of the Oregon State Police quickly arrived on the scene. Lieutenant Mark Kazar, who led the case, later admitted that the investigation had been delayed for a day, mainly because there were no signs of violence at the campsite. But something about the scene felt wrong. Officer Erickson described the camp as spooky, noting that even the milk had been left on the table. The investigation soon became one of the largest in Oregon's history, involving the Oregon State Police, volunteers, Explorer Scouts, the U.S. Forest Service, and the National Guard. The search spanned 25 miles of roads and trails, while helicopters and planes flew overhead, scanning the area with infrared technology, hoping to spot something, anything that could explain the mystery. But despite all these massive efforts, there was no trace of the family. The forest, dense and overgrown, seemed to swallow up every attempt to uncover the truth. No tracks, no broken branches, no sign of where they had gone. It was as if the Cowdens had vanished into thin air. The chilling question lingered: was it just an accident, or had something far worse happened? As the days passed and the first week turned into the second, a growing sense of urgency began to cloud the investigation. What had initially been an odd disappearance had now become something far more disturbing. Theories began to pile up, each one darker than the last, as investigators tried to make sense of the vanishing of the Seng family. The possibility of a voluntary disappearance was considered. Could the family have simply decided to leave their lives behind and disappear into the wilderness, shedding the burden of their past? It seemed plausible at first. Yet, the more the detectives dug, the less likely it appeared. Richard, the father, was a well-respected member of the community. He had no criminal record, no debts, and no signs of trouble in his life. He was known for being dependable and responsible, someone who would never leave without a trace. And then there was Belinda, a devoted mother, especially to her baby daughter, Melissa. There was no reason to believe she would abandon her children, especially without leaving a single clue behind. The more they investigated, the more the voluntary disappearance theory unraveled. Then came a theory that cast a darker shadow over the case: a murder-suicide. Could Richard have snapped? Had something gone horribly wrong during their trip, and in a moment of madness he turned on his family? It was a chilling thought. But after a thorough search of the campsite, no signs of a violent struggle were found. No blood, no weapons, not a single mark of an attack. If Richard had killed his family, there would have been some trace of it. Yet, the campsite was eerily clean. This theory, too, quickly began to fall apart under the weight of the evidence, or rather, the lack of it. The next theory seemed almost too simple, too natural to be true: a bear attack. The woods surrounding Carberry Creek were teeming with wildlife, and the area was known to have bears. It made sense. A family, left alone in the wilderness, could have easily fallen prey to one of these creatures. But as investigators combed the campsite and surrounding area, they found no evidence of a bear. No tracks, no claw marks, no mauling. It was as if the idea of a bear attack had been placed there to distract them from the real horror. Yet, whispers still lingered in the town. Could it have been a bear? Had the family been taken by one, left without a trace? But deep down, the investigators knew this theory was as hollow as the others. As the investigation trudged on, leads began to surface. A few witnesses claimed to have seen the Tons in nearby towns, walking along roads or entering stores. But when the police followed up, each sighting turned out to be a case of mistaken identity. False hopes that only seemed to deepen the mystery. Every tip, no matter how small, was a cruel tease, like a glimpse of an answer just out of reach. One lead brought them to a man with a violent past. A local resident with a criminal background, someone who had been seen near the area around the time the family disappeared. He seemed like a plausible suspect, but when the police questioned him, he denied any involvement, and there was no solid evidence tying him to the case. He had an alibi. Still, the question lingered in the air: was this a coincidence, Or was there something more to this man's connection to the family's disappearance? The police were left with more questions than answers, each one darker than the last, as they continued to dig deeper into a mystery that seemed to defy reason. Detective Evans, the lead investigator, confessed the growing uncertainty. We didn't know what we were looking for. Was it an accident? A kidnapping? A cover-up? His frustration was palpable. Days turned into weeks with no new leads, and the case slipped into cold darkness, leaving only unanswered questions and vanishing shadows. Please share your thoughts in the comment section. I will discuss this case with you in more detail. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. For 7 long months, the case lingered in the dark. Not a single lead, not a single clue. The Seng family had vanished without a trace, and no one could explain why. The police, volunteers, and even the community had all but given up. It was as if the forest had consumed them, swallowed them whole, and refused to release its grip. But then, on a chilly spring afternoon, April 12, 1975, something changed. Something that would reopen the case and send it spiraling into a new, more terrifying direction. It had been 7 months since the family disappeared, and everyone had all but forgotten. But in the woods near Carberry Creek, 2 gold prospectors, used to hiking through the rugged terrain in search of their fortune, stumbled upon something they never expected. The day started off like any other. The air was still and cold. A quiet silence settled over the forest, broken only by the faint rustling of leaves beneath their boots. But today, something felt off. They couldn't quite place it, but the hairs on the back of their necks stood on end as they walked deeper into the woods. The dense forest pressed in around them, the trees towering above, unmoving, as if watching their every step. Then one of the men froze. He squinted ahead, something in the distance catching his eye, a shape strange and unnatural. There, on the hillside, tied to a tree, was the body of a man. His skin, pale and mottled with decay, barely recognizable. The body had clearly been there for some time, left to rot in the cold, damp forest. Shock washed over the men. They hadn't expected this. They couldn't believe it. The first man called out to his partner, but he didn't need to. His partner had already seen the body, and they were both struck with a cold, sickening realization. They didn't know who this man was, but one thing was certain: this was no accident. This wasn't just another body left behind by nature. This was something far darker. And as they moved closer, their fear grew. Hidden in a small cave nearby were more bodies. Another adult woman, a child, and a baby. Their bodies carefully arranged, as if placed there intentionally. The sight of it froze them in place, their minds racing to comprehend what they were witnessing. These were the bodies of people who had been hidden away from the world. The realization hit them like a punch to the gut. They had discovered something far worse than they ever imagined. The 2 men wasted no time. Their hearts pounding, they rushed back to the nearest town to report their discovery, knowing that this was just the beginning of an even darker mystery. What had happened to these people, and who had placed their bodies there? The questions piled up. The answers remained elusive, and the terror of the unknown began to consume them. Law enforcement was quickly alerted, and a search team was dispatched to the location. When they arrived, the bodies were carefully removed and transported to the local morgue. There, authorities began the painful and gruesome task of identifying them. It didn't take long for the truth to surface. The bodies found in that cave, nestled on the secluded hillside, belonged to the Seng family. Richard, Belinda, David, and baby Melissa, the very family who had vanished into the vast Oregon wilderness 7 months ago. The mystery that had gripped the town for months had finally been answered, but it left behind even more questions. The shock of the discovery was compounded by the manner in which the family had been left. Richard, the father, was found tied to a tree, a detail that only deepened the enigma. Why had he been left there, abandoned in such a manner? Who could have done this? The Seng family had disappeared without a trace, and now their remains were being uncovered in the most horrifying way imaginable. Autopsies were performed on all 4 bodies, and the results sent shockwaves through the investigation. Belinda and David had both died from .22 caliber gunshot wounds, clean, precise shots that suggested a cold, calculated execution. But it was the discovery of baby Melissa's cause of death that sent a chill down the spine of every investigator. Severe head trauma. How could anyone inflict such cruelty on an innocent infant? It was clear to the authorities that the family hadn't been killed immediately after their disappearance. Their bodies showed signs of having been kept alive for a period of time before they were murdered. How long had they been in captivity? What kind of torment had they endured in the hands of their captor? These questions weighed heavily on the minds of everyone involved in the case, but there were no answers, just more darkness. The location of the bodies was just as haunting. The cave, tucked away deep in the forest, was nearly 7 miles from where the family had last been seen. How had their killer managed to take them so far into the woods without leaving a trace? It made no sense. The campsite had shown no sign of a struggle, no trail leading away from it. The family had vanished, and the only clues left were their bodies, hidden away like some twisted secret. The investigators combed the area, desperate for any potential evidence that could lead them to the killer. But the bodies offered few answers. The way they were positioned, hidden so deliberately, suggested a level of premeditation. This wasn't a random act of violence, it was planned. No murder weapon was found, no signs of a struggle. How had the killer abducted a family of 4, brought them to such a remote location, and executed them without leaving any trace? The questions piled up, and with every passing moment, the mystery only grew darker. The investigators began to entertain a chilling possibility. The family might have been killed elsewhere, possibly not long after their initial disappearance. The remote cave where their bodies were found suggested that whoever was responsible had gone to great lengths to hide the remains, to make sure they were never discovered. But the deeper the investigation went, the more disturbing the case became. Why had Richard been tied to a tree? Why, of all places, had the family been hidden in that cave, so carefully concealed? The questions haunted the minds of the detectives. What kind of person could carry out such a cold, calculated act of violence? Was the killer someone the family knew? Was it a personal connection? Or was it a stranger, someone who had wandered into their peaceful camping spot, preying on their vulnerability? As the investigation intensified, new details began to surface. The police conducted interviews with those who had been at the campground on September 1st, the day the Seng family had been last seen. But it wasn't until they spoke with one particular family, also camping in the area, that the case took a strange turn. The family from Los Angeles had arrived at the campground around 5 p.m. that day. What they witnessed during their visit would later become crucial to the investigation. As they strolled through the park, they noticed a pickup truck parked nearby. 3 figures were standing by it, 2 men and a woman. The family couldn't shake the feeling that these strangers were waiting for them to leave. Something about them felt wrong, unsettling. The father of the family, still uneasy about the encounter, later recalled that the trio's presence made them nervous. It was an odd feeling, one they couldn't shake. So, in an attempt to avoid further contact, they decided to move on. What struck the investigators as significant was the timing. This strange trio had been seen very near where the Seng family had been camping. The woman, though her description didn't quite match Belinda, had caught their attention. The 2 men also acted suspiciously, their behavior raising more questions than answers. Were they just another group of random campers, or was there something more sinister at play? Could these strangers be connected to the Seng family's disappearance? Or had they simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time? The thought that the trio might have played a role in the disappearance planted a seed of suspicion in the investigators' minds. As each new lead seemed to evaporate, the mystery of the Seng family's fate only deepened. And with it, The growing unease that someone or something was lurking just beyond the edges of the investigation, waiting to be uncovered. Lieutenant Kazar, a seasoned investigator, made a critical observation as he dug deeper into the case. The remote location of the Seng family's bodies, found deep inside the cave, suggested that the killer was someone familiar with the area, someone who knew the woods intimately. The cave, nestled among steep hills and dense trees, was not easily accessible to outsiders. Whoever had hidden the bodies there was no stranger to the forest. It was becoming clear, this wasn't a random act. This was planned. Then, a new lead surfaced, one that sent shivers down the spines of the investigators. A volunteer from Grants Pass, who had assisted in the search, came forward with a chilling revelation. In September, he had searched the very cave where Belinda, David, and little Melissa's bodies were later discovered. But when he had looked inside months earlier, the cave had been empty. This was a key detail. If the bodies hadn't been there before, the question arose, where had they been during that time? And why had they suddenly appeared months later? The volunteer led investigators back to the cave, to the exact spot he had searched months ago. Upon arrival, the team realized with growing horror that this was indeed the same cave. The question now loomed large: had the killer deliberately moved the bodies to evade detection, knowing the search was underway? Had they been placed there only after the initial search? The chilling thought settled in. The killer wasn't some faceless figure. This was someone who had studied the land, who knew how to manipulate the search and evade the authorities. The investigation had only just begun, and the deeper they dug, the more terrifying the truth seemed to be. The Seng family's disappearance had opened a door to a world of secrets that might never be uncovered.